Hello, you beautiful legends, and welcome to Blunt Force Healing Podcast. This is episode number 846. And God, I have an update, a solid update for this Friday. So, while the previous days might have been a little bit dull, this one started a little bit dull because Julian had a day off school due to the wintry conditions, or rather icy conditions of the car park and all the surroundings of the school, and no resources basically to make it better. They decided to keep the school closed for Friday, which meant that Julian had a lot of time on his hands, and he spent a bit of that, well, most of it, either playing console or doing his stuff, while we were doing our grocery shopping and a lot of other things. Also a bit of a walk, but as we approached the lunchtime, I spoke to my wife, and she had the whole schedule of things to do, so she didn't necessarily need us to participate in that day. So I wanted to take Julian with me and use the remaining 3 hours of the daylight, maybe 3.5, and get the drone and go to Killogs. And if you follow the project long enough, you might be able to recall the episode on Killogs. If not, you can search it across the blog and you should easily find it. But Killogs is a specific mountain. It's a table mountain, not even technically a mountain because it doesn't cross the 600 meters height barrier, but it's called mountain regardless, like many of the high hills in Ireland. But Killogs is specific because it is a part of one of the edges of a big valley, Glenade Valley, that is quite unusual. It has table mountains on both sides, and they create like a cliffs overlooking cliffs, and there's a lake in the valley as well. But the most interesting part is that I discovered back in the days that on top of Killogs, which is not a very popular place, there is an actual lake, and that lake had like a whitish part on one of the shores, which looked like a beach, either sandy or pebble beach, or rocky, but bright or light color. So I knew that it might be possible to maybe even step into the water, and it's not a typical bogland lake. And there is no trail to Killogs, and the only people that come there are proper wanderers and people that just find their way through, either following maybe some slightly visible disturbed areas where the sheep are grazing, and this way carefully approaching the top. The views are amazing there. But this time we wanted to go there because first I was alone myself the first time I visited Killogs, and the second, not only I wanted to go with Julian to the Killogs itself, but also it was covered in snow, so we wanted to use the last opportunity. And because the snow was mostly melted and the roads were okay to get as far as Killogs, we had a chance to take a drone and maybe hike up to the top, take a couple of pictures and come back. It was pretty windless day, so we were hoping for nice shots and decent hike, But when we arrived at the foot of Kilobes at the car park, it turned out that it's very windy, almost like stormy. So the valley seemed to be very drafty, and there was a very strong draft, and the wind was so strong that I was really afraid to approach Kilobes, because there are a couple of parts where when you walk along the road, there are trees, and the trees were bending very strong and they were creaking. So I was afraid that some branch might fall on us. So we decided to skip this. And while we were going towards house, I came up with an idea that turned out to be a very bad one, to go around towards Aru Mountain and see if we can reach out the forest and at least kind of do some reconnaissance and check that forest. So we kept driving, the road was nice, and at some stage, just before we were approaching the forest, road was very much uphill, and there were warning signs that it's about 7% incline. But it's not a big deal for a car like ours if the roads are dry and okay. So we kept going, and at some stage, they started being whitish and a little bit kind of maybe not icy, but I was afraid that they might be slippery. But we kept going using the momentum, and it became steeper and steeper. And at some stage, we got to the point where we had to stop because the car couldn't go further and started sliding the wheels. So I stopped it in place, and it started slightly sliding, and it stopped barely with a single wheel on the side of the road where the bit of grass was, so it got the grip. So we were essentially stuck on the slippery, icy hill, and that was the bad idea that I wasn't expecting to end up with. So I wrote down the whole story and how we got out of it in the blog. So if you can go to the description and go to www.bluntforcehealing.com or bluntforcehealing.wordpress.com and read the details. But essentially, it was a quite tiresome 1.5 to 2 hours of a challenge and struggle to make it, well, maybe not alive, because we knew that we will be alive, but with the car undamaged, and to make sure that we actually get out of there, because the only other option was to leave the car on the side of the road, close it, and wait for the snow and ice to melt, and then come back, basically call someone to give us a lift back home, and then come after 2-3 days and pick up the car. But that was the last resort. So I did a lot of stuff that I described in the blog post, including using my hatchet to disturb the ice on the road and create some sort of way to get the grip. I used even the beach sand that was left in the floor mats to get a grip, which was amazing tool to get the grip. But unfortunately, I didn't have much of that sand in there, so I only sprinkle 1 or 2 areas where I could get it. I borrowed a shovel from a nearby farmer that was very helpful in being there and offering his help, and potentially the tractor to help us if the towing was needed. But on that hill, it was so slippery that I was afraid that not only we will end up in the ditch, but also the tractor will. So it was really a bad situation. And with a couple of tricks that I came up with, and with patience, even though it was scary and it felt like the situation without escape or the end or the good end, we managed to get enough grip, so slightly reverse the car on the grass and slide it to the flatter area, get the momentum, so get the grip and get momentum to fall into another area that was more grassy, and just kind of turn a little bit so the front of the car slid and turned itself. And that was my only option that I came up with, because the road was very narrow and there was no chance to do the multiple turn with that slippery road. On the normal road it would be okay, but in this situation we had only one chance, one go. So there was a lot of planning and preparation, and it worked to turn around. And then there was a very challenging downhill with a bend where we could really end up in a ditch or on the sidewall, because roads in Ireland, especially rural ones, are really narrow and they have no space to move in between. But I came up with another idea of using a very slight strip of the grass on the side as a grip, better grip than the tracks of the road, which were very hard and slippery. So they were beaten up and slippery, icy tracks. And the middle of the road, which was still fairly undisturbed, kind of normal powdery snow, so it had a bit of more grip before it gets beaten down. So I basically shifted the car to the side of the road and the middle of the road, so the wheels were not going along the tracks, normal tracks. And fortunately we managed to do that after that almost 2 hours of struggle, and the car was undamaged. The farmer, the guy that was always there and was offering everything that we needed just in case, just his presence, he didn't need to help us. We didn't need anything or any of his tools. I borrowed the shovel, but it only helped us a little bit to throw a little bit of mud on the road, but didn't have much of that to be used. But just the sheer presence of someone that cares, it kept me mentally sane and patient and thoughtful. Otherwise, I think it would be much more difficult. But eventually we made it, and he was probably even more happy, or equally happy as we were in the end. So it was a great experience because I learned a lot, but also very scary and stressful experience, especially for Julian and myself, because we were afraid that we might not get back home, not only on time, but we will have to look for someone that can get as close as possible, and we will have to walk and leave the car. So not a terrible situation, but it was really bad for us at the time when we got stuck. Fortunately, it was still the daylight, and we still had that 2 hours to work it out and get back. Because if it was closer to the sunset, I think we would have to leave the car there. So yeah, that was the uphill horror that we survived, fortunately. And I have a single picture in the vlog that Julian took. I didn't even know that he took that picture. I only discovered that later on, that he sent it to my wife when I'm just kind of kneeling down with a hatchet and trying to disturb the ice. So you can check it out, you can read it out. And yeah, if you have any feedback, let me know. But that's it for today. Thank you very much for tuning in. Have a great rest of the day, or afternoon, or evening, wherever you are on this beautiful planet. Stay tuned and see you again tomorrow.